Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to the monthly wrap-up for January of 2020. At the beginning of this month, I told myself that I would make the entirety of January an indie month. And then I promptly thought, wow, if I make that a hard and fast rule, I'll probably feel constricted and I don't want to risk a slump, so you know what, I'll ease up. I'll include traditional books. And then I ended up reading only indie books. I was also in a panic to catch up with a lot of review books that I should have gotten to a while ago. And so I read 7 review books and then accepted 6 more because I have no chill. So let's jump right in. First up was a review book, and I will include the links to all the review videos in the description down below as usual. But my first one was Lycan's Blood Queen by Catherine Edward. This is an urban fantasy romance all about a young grad student that moves to town for school, only to kind of run afoul of the local werewolf pack. You see, the werewolves think she's a vampire because she smells like a vampire. But if she is one, she doesn't know it. So she is taken into custody by the werewolf king, her adoptive father is involved, and starts discovering things about her own past and what she is. This is a fantastic guilty pleasure type read because there are a lot of things that fall into very generic tropes for the genre. Things like the obligatory human friend that gives her all the setup info and then disappears to never come up again. The fact that you actually never find out what she's in grad school for or what her actual interest is academically. But what it does well, it does really well. There are some nice twists and turns that I liked. The ending was particularly bold, and this is the first in a duology, and I am hoping to get around to the sequel eventually. Hopefully it won't take me as long as it took me to get to the original book. Fingers crossed. The next book, another review, was more trippy in nature, and that is Lost in the Clouds by R.K. Gold. This is all about a man who dies of cancer at the beginning of our book, and it is kind of in this weird gray cloud limbo place that he has to stay in until he completes these 7 trials to move through to the other side. And it was actually really interesting seeing the descriptions of this place, how he's basically, again, like floating in a cloud with these inky black tendrils coming closer to him. He has a strange little wizened old guide that has to help him get through to the other side. Now, this is very philosophical, very descriptive. It's not a lot of plot, strictly speaking, and I'm not entirely sure that I agreed with the philosophies that it was trying to state. And the author found the book and they were like, I don't know that I agree with it, and I wrote it. So it's definitely one of those big think books, but if you like that kind of thing, I would highly suggest it. Just, expect more character study than plot. Next up was another urban fantasy, not quite a romance though, and it was one of my favorites of the month, and that is This Time by Aza Davis. This is all about a young woman called Nadira who died years and years ago in the 90s trying to help defeat this evil demon king. She defeated the king, but after her death, the demons came out to the humans and tried to claim that they were basically victims of the demon hunters, and so now kind of earned status as a protected people group or demon group. And Nadira comes back from the dead for a reason she's not sure, but I always love a book that starts with someone climbing out of their own grave. I love the emotional stress that she goes under. Not that I love characters going under emotional stress, but it was done so beautifully in her heartbreak, in coming back and not really wanting to jump back into the fray after literally giving the ultimate sacrifice and seeing all of her friends and training comrades move on without her. There's also a fantastic reveal halfway through the book, a lovely plot twist that just added a whole other layer that obviously I'm not going to spoil, but there was another one at the ending, a gut punch plot twist that I literally was like jaw drop when I read it, and I'm really excited. I have this sequel on my review list. I'm so happy. This is also an Own Voices book. Both the protagonist and the author are Black, and I loved that she's adept at fighting, and she's badass, and she's emotionally vulnerable, and she has killer dreads. So, like, everyone wins. It's just a fantastic book. One of my favorites. I think it's, like, tied for top 2. Absolute 5 stars. Would recommend. Up next was something that I should have reviewed a long time before this, and that was Caroline's Lighthouse by Brandy Easterling Collins. This is a YA mystery / ghost story all about a young girl named Caroline who goes back to her deceased mother's estate with her father and stepmother to essentially make the place into a bed and breakfast. Now there is a lighthouse, and it is Caroline's lighthouse, Caroline's ancestor, that she supposedly jumped off of to her death decades prior. So this whole point of the story is essentially trying to figure out, did the original Caroline commit suicide? Did she have a lover? What was all of that about? As well as dealing with some of the more creepy things in the house. The premise was aces. The writing style left a little bit to be desired. It felt very basic, like pages and pages of info dump at the beginning, and a lot of characters tended to just say their motives out loud to the protagonist. So, in premise, fantastic. In writing style, not so much. So I think this evened out to like a 3 stars for me. I would still definitely read something else by the author moving forward, assuming that she, has been working on her craft. I don't believe this is the only book she has out, but I would still suggest it if you're looking for a more lighthearted ghost story. Up next is something even more lighthearted, and that is Anyone But You by Chelsea Cameron. I always like to fit in some romances just to kind of like lighten it up, and this is a WLW romance between a yoga instructor and a CrossFit queen, and they both end up in the same building after Tuesday. The CrossFit queen buys the building, and Sutton, our yoga instructor, is not happy about it. Tuesday loves to play her music way too loud and is generally a nuisance, but also she likes to work out a lot, and Sutton kind of catches her mid-workout, and maybe some feelings start happening. It was fantastic. There was a ton of diversity in the book. Obviously, we have 2 queer women. We have Sutton's, I believe, roommate Z, if I remember correctly, who is non-binary. We have polyamory. We have a bunch of stuff. A bunch of representation, which low-key I think led some people to rate it because of it, but I liked it. It was adorable. It had some good sex scenes, because if you're gonna write erotica, you need good sex scenes. So would highly recommend for anyone looking for a WLW romance. Up next is the other book tied for my absolute favorite of the month, and that is All the King's Traitors by Keelan Rivers. This book is very hard to explain because it is so many different characters from points of views, and it's basically a high fantasy with this tyrant god king ruling over all of it, and there is a system of magic called godstones, and essentially these godstones fall to earth. The first thing they hit is the thing they become a summoner of. My personal favorite is the godstone that accidentally falls on a crow, so now the person that found that can summon crows. It's awesome. It is queer norm as far as I can tell, and I love that. We have a trans character. We have maybe a WLW romance. It looked like a meet cute to me. But we also have MLM marriage at one point, and it was done so well. It was a high fantasy with no info dumping, which I loved. The world building was fantastically done. You never felt like you were having way too much information shoved in your face. We see maybe the beginnings of a redemption arc for one of our characters, a loving adoptive brother bond. Like, there's so many different characters that all come together more or less at the end that I loved it. 5 stars, ultimate favorite. I just raved all the time. I would love to get the sequel. And also, this book has one of my favorite taglines of any book ever, and that is on the back, and it says, "You would be wise to question your God." I love that. I love that tagline. The whole marketing for this book, from cover to tagline, is just absolute aces. Up next was the sequel to a duology, and that is 1,000 Secret Sorrows by Matthew Cagle. This is the sequel to A Loom of Sorrows, which is very high sci-fi, not a space opera, but I do like high sci-fi. This follows the same protagonist as before, as he tries to uncover the memories of Earth's hero. In the first book, it talks about how Earth was basically being destroyed by these storms. These aliens showed up to help humans go to this other planet, but the other planet was actually kind of a hellhole. Our hero from the past, Enon, then goes to Earth, finds that it's still fertile, and comes back. And so the big thing that our modern day protagonist, with the thoughts of this hero stuck in his head, has to figure out is, why did he go back? With this incredible, fertile, beautiful Earth that he could live on, why did he go back to the hellhole? And it was very sad. It's a very depressing duology, but very, very powerful. I love the formatting of the flashbacks because our protagonist can end up with flashbacks in his head based on what he touches with his magical, silvery, artificial fingers. You can end up with a lot of flashbacks suddenly appearing, but they're always done really well in the story because they're in a different font. So you're never confused whether or not what you're seeing is real or a memory. And I really loved that. This book in particular followed through on a lot of the mystery set up by the first one. Obviously, I can't spoil them, but almost everything that was set up was resolved in a certain way. I had a little bit of a problem with the very end where it felt like they were trying to do this really big, like, fast forward and covering like centuries in a couple chapters, and so it felt like a little bit too much. I would have rather that the mystery that was resolved at the end of the book be fit in a different way earlier on, but beyond that was still really good. Again, not the best pick if you are new or a beginner at sci-fi, but if you like really hard high sci-fi, this is definitely the one for you. Up next, another romance book, because gosh darn, that last one was depressing, and that is Trade Me by Courtney Milan. Obviously, a lot of people have learned about Courtney Milan since the RWA scandal, but I'm not going to talk about that. Regardless, when all of that broke out last year, I really wanted to help support her, so I went and I found some of her books, and I bought them, and this is one of the ones I read. This is essentially all about a Chinese-American student meeting a billionaire. And I know that sounds generic, but this is the best take on that premise I have ever read. And I went through a period where I read a lot of romances like this, and this was fantastic. We have our main character, Tina, who dares said billionaire playboy, well, not really a playboy, but definitely a billionaire, to trade places with her in her very, very poor life and to see if he can hack it. I loved this book. It defies so many tropes. It defies so many bullshit gender roles and so many bullshit power plays that happen when you have college student meets billionaire. And I just loved it. It was just fantastic. Our billionaire, not playboy, Blake, is fantastic. He has some of his own personal struggles, which men don't often get in books. He's got some representation, and obviously I don't want to spoil it, for his struggles that you don't see men have in books, but they have in real life, and I love that it was included. I loved the ending. I believe it is the beginning of trilogy series, maybe. I'm not sure. I know there's like a free novella if you sign up for her newsletter or whatever, and I might have to look into it because it was just some of the best romance I've read in a while, and I've read a lot. Up next, another indie book that I bought a while ago that I've been meaning to get around to, and I finally did, and that is Werewolf Nights by Marie Hamill. And this is all about a young woman who has grown up knowing that this werewolf is going to come back for her. And she's had a lot of struggles in her life. Her childhood sweetheart disappeared when he went off to be an actor in California. Her husband died in this boating accident, and she's living in a town that's obsessed with werewolves, where this one movie company is now going to be filming a movie about werewolves, and she decides to audition for it, mostly just because she needs the money, and ends up getting cast in the lead role, and ends up maybe having strange feelings for her co-star. This book had a fantastically kitschy premise. The writing was really not there, though. The plot moved forward so quickly, and so many things were revealed with so little finesse in a lot of ways, and it sucked because I loved that kind of kitschy, almost cozy mystery-esque like prompt, but I ended up giving it 2 stars. There are still adorable parts to it, but for the most part, the writing just wasn't there, and it almost kind of read like a soap opera at one point, but like a soap opera that is low-key running out of ideas. So, unfortunately, not the best one, but I would still read something else from the author moving forward. Up next was a book that I was really happy to find because it's something I really needed, actually, and that is You're Being Ridiculous by C.E.A. Forster. This is basically a memoir about a foster carer, which I learned is what they call it in, I believe, Britain is where it's based. All the kids are calling her mum at the very least. This is about CEA Forster's work being a foster care with kids. Obviously, all the names have been changed, and it's very short. It's like 100 pages. But what I loved about it the most was she only focused on the happy stories or the silly stories or the how do I be a parent to two little boys that are basically like lion cubs stories. And when you're taking foster classes, as I am, you focus so much on the depressing stuff, on the behaviors to look out for, and the, you know, how to be on the lookout for signs that they've been sexually abused or are, you know, going through drug related health issues, and you focus so much on all the horrible stuff. And so to have this book where it was just, here's cute and fun stories of someone who's actually done this, kind of helps me like breathe a little bit more deeply, because you can get so caught up in everything that can go wrong and all of the struggles that you forget that there's still going to be good parts and there's still going to be good memories as a result of all of this. So if you would like an insight into what it is like to be a foster parent, the author is actually a single foster parent, so hers would even be a little bit different of a situation than mine, also because, you know, different country. But I would highly suggest this one if you want a little bit more look into it. It was definitely the lighthearted look at fostering that I needed when you're dealing about things like, you know, how to help children with that have been involved with sex trafficking. I needed some silly stories about boys that insisted on going to the old, boring airplane museum. Up next is The Dragon Plague by Anna Mantovani. This is one of those books that I really should have gotten to sooner, but I'm glad I did eventually. And that has to deal all with this plague that came when dragons were brought back from the dead. It is very infectious, it is very dangerous, and everyone is obsessed with avoiding it. Our two protagonists are Eric, an older cop with a wife and two kids, and Sophie, a young single doctor. And Sophie kind of gets caught up in something beyond her. Her friend Amanda and coworker is researching the cure for the plague and discovers this older woman named Emma who has antibodies against it. And she's pretty sure that Emma could be the cure to all of it. But the government doesn't actually want there to be a cure. Amanda gets arrested, and Emma and our protagonist Sophie end up on the run. Eric, who is a cop, has to chase after them, and they both realize some things about their world. Now, this was a very slow premise, considering the fact that we're starting with plague and dragons. Both of our protagonists are a little bit boring in their daily lives, but as it picks up, it gets really good. I particularly adored the ending. There were two twists, basically one per protagonist, that I did not see coming, but were fantastically well done. There was one little mention at the very end that kind of called back to something else, and it made me laugh. It was very well done in the second half. Very slow to pick up, but when it got there, it really got there, and I would very, very much recommend it for anyone that loves dragons but wants to see them done in a different way. Although I will say, not many dragons. I would have preferred maybe some more dragons. But you know what? It's a trilogy, so I'm hoping that there'll be more in the next one. And the last one, which is kind of a letdown, and that is Girl of Glass by Megan O. Russell. I picked this because it was the most intriguing premise of a book under 300 pages. Because I wanted to finish another book and I didn't have much time. This is a dystopian, because apparently I was in a mood after the last book, all about a young girl living in the domes. The world has basically gone to hell, and the domes were created by this essentially ruling elite who wanted to preserve human genetics. And so everyone in the domes is living a fairly good, fairly healthy life, while everyone else outside is dying from a million different things, if it's acid rain or disease or what have you. And lo and behold, again, our protagonist begins to discover that maybe the outside world isn't as lawless as she expected, and maybe her friends and family in the domes aren't as good as she expected. This was a fantastic premise, but it lost it for me in a couple different ways. One, the outside people take these drugs that affect their bodies, and that was a really cool premise. The problem is they basically just turn into vampires and werewolves. And so it was like, why? Why make some new reason for there to be vampires and werewolves? Why not just have dystopia plus vampires and werewolves. It felt a little bit too contrived in that aspect, and also way too much time was spent on a love triangle. Of course, our protagonist has kind of one love interest on either side to, I guess, symbolize her attachments to both or something. I'm not sure. But so much time was spent on that I'm like, okay, honey, do you actually care that people on the outside are dying, or that, you know, this could affect your life in here? Or are you really all that focused on the two boys in your life? And it got a little bit aggravating in that respect. And the ending also felt like a shock ending, more for a cliffhanger than anything that made sense. Like, even when I sat and I thought through everything else that had happened, it didn't really make any sense. And maybe it would moving forward with the series, but I don't really intend to. I am glad I got this one read, at least, so I know moving forward it's one more, you know, book I can get off the myriad of free BookBub books I have on my Kindle app. But I'm really kind of sad that that's how I ended this month, because beyond that, this was a pretty awesome month. I'm really excited to move forward. At some point this year, I'm going to pick a month that is all about sequels, because I have so many sequels that I need to take care of. But again, I gotta re-catch up, because I just can't say no to indie review books, apparently. So thank you so much for watching, and with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.